Well, good evening, and this is Dry Bones, and I am on my way home. I'm almost home, but I had to say I had an amazing last few weeks, really amazing, just to see that that residue is being just embraced by so many groups. There's a new ministry in Ohio, getting ready to open up a men's home and a women's home. I think they're opening up the women's home first, and their entire board of directors came out to be introduced to residue. And at the same time, they actually the next day they voted that residue would be the foundation for their ministry homes. So that's a blessing, a true blessing, and I'm moved. I'm moved. I'm humbled. I am grateful, right? Grateful to be used in such a way. And I'm not going to run my trap too much this evening because I have a great guest. Excuse me. It's not the COVID. So last week, I wasn't able to host the show, but you guys were able to hear. I understand you couldn't see; they had some video problems with the Rev, so you were able to hear Reverend Kraft and another young lady that he had there with him, and Jr. hosted for me. So we want to say thank you to Jr. From the Natural Family Foundation. All right. Well, look. I got a guest. His name is Hal Shirtleth. He's the co-founder of Camp Constitution. And Camp Constitution, I'm going to let him explain everything that they do. But a lot of my homeschoolers, well, friends of mine that are homeschoolers, I told them about a book that can help them to homeschool and help them to tutor. And so a lot of people were interested in it. I've sent some people the book, and I'm going to bring in the man who sent me the books to send to y'all. So I'm not even going to, here's Hal Shirtleth from Camp Constitution, y'all. Hal, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on, David. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. Yes, so Camp Constitution is a charitable trust. We were founded way back, or I should say conceived in 2008, and we started by having a week-long family camp. And camps were in Rindge, New Hampshire, and we've moved them to Western Massachusetts. This year, our camp was held at the Singing Hills Christian Camp and Retreat Center in Plainfield, New Hampshire, which is just a little south of a little north of Concord, and we're going to be hosting it there next year as well. But as time went on, we started a publishing arm. We published books. We started a radio show, which actually broadcasts up in Monticello, Maine, not too up in Aroostook County. We have a YouTube channel, a Speakers Bureau, and we host the Samuel Blumenfeld Archives, which is an incredible free resource, donations accepted, of course, for homeschoolers, teachers, researchers, historians, and people who have an active intellect. And you mentioned the book, Phonics for Success. I'll put it up here. This was actually Sam Blumenfeld was the creator of this. A little background on Sam. Sam was known as one of the pioneers of the modern homeschool movement. Sam was born in New York City in the Bronx, 1926. He died in 2015. He was a dear friend of mine. He was one of our instructors, and I met him probably I think it was 1989. I met him at an event in Boston, and we became good friends ever since. Sam learned about the reading problem that this country has, and most of the English-speaking world, by the way, not just in the United States. Back in the early 60s, he was the editor for Grosset and Dunlop, the folks that gave us the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew books. And a friend of his asked him to join his reading reform organization. And he said, why would you need to do that? He said, you simply learn the phonics, you sound out the vowel sounds, you learn the consonants, and you put it together, and you're a good reader. He said, Sam, you need to read a book called Why Johnny Can't Read, written by a man named Rudolf Fleisch. Now, Rudolf Fleisch was actually a socialist from Vienna, although he was an honorable man, believe it or not. He moved to New York, and he wrote a book, Why Johnny Can't Read, discussing that from intensive phonics to the look-say method. It was introduced in the 1930s in this country. And the Depression and then World War II, I guess, actually postponed the total implementation of this look-say, this Dick and Jane book, which my generation learned. And that's what the reading problem, it was because you were teaching people how to read. Basically, you look at a word, they call sight words, that the words, instead of standing for sounds, stand for symbols. That's how the Chinese pictographs. It was causing all kinds of problems. So Sam read the book. He actually became friends with Rudolf Fleisch, but Sam went well beyond Fleisch's research. Sam went back to Horace Mann, who was an educator. He was a big advocate of state-controlled education. Horace Mann went to Prussia in Germany, and he came back and basically said the future is in Germany, state-controlled education. And he was able to successfully get Massachusetts to become the first state to have compulsory education laws. And then eventually, within, I don't know, maybe 15 or 20 years, the whole country, pretty much by the 1880s, the whole country had these compulsory education laws. And then a man like John Dewey came on the scene. And John Dewey, who was an atheist and a humanist, although his father was a Calvinist preacher from Vermont, John Dewey said, we will use the pulpits we will use the classrooms to promote humanism and socialism as ministers use the pulpit to promote Christianity. And they were very successful in basically turning our public or government schools into what they are today. People are functionally illiterate, dyslexia. In fact, Sam did a lot of research on dyslexia, and he believed that it was artificially created because of the look-say method. There may have been some other rare circumstances. He pointed out that the Rockefellers, we're talking about the Rockefeller brothers, Nelson and David, and a few others. Nelson, David. I'm trying to think of the one from Arkansas. Anyway, the one that owned the inn in Vermont, they actually were sent to an experimental school that Dewey started in New York City. And Nelson Rockefeller was functionally illiterate. Most people don't realize that because of school, because of the method of teaching, the look-say method. Well, the school was closed down. It was sort of an experimental school. In other words, we failed miserably, so we're going to introduce this to the whole country. And then John Dewey actually visited the Soviet Union because he wanted to promote this in the Soviet Union. And Stalin didn't like what was going on. He put Dewey's disciples in Siberia and said, this is okay for corrupt and capitalist countries, but we want nothing to do with it here. And kicked John Dewey out of the Soviet Union. And the city of Boston, by the way, the man who gave us the look-say method was a very honorable man. It was William Gallaudet. Now, so if you ever drive through Hartford, you might see the School for the Deaf. William Gallaudet was a pastor, and he was successfully taught deaf people how to read. Now, he had to use this look-say method because deaf people cannot hear sounds. And he thought that this would be a good thing to introduce to schools where people could hear. So it was brought into Boston, and within a couple of years, the Boston school teachers totally rejected it. They said, this is not working. And, when you experiment with young people, it's kind of a dangerous thing because they're going to have long-time repercussions. So Sam Blumenfeld started doing a lot of his own research and writing. One of his first books, I have a copy here, it's called How to Start Your Own Private School, which is available on Amazon. And it was Sam, and at that time, Sam was he was an atheist. He was raised as he was raised in a Jewish household that was sort of nominally believers. They celebrated the holidays, but they really didn't. They weren't Orthodox Jews. And he became an atheist, he said, in the late 50s, early 60s, after his dad passed away. But as he was doing research on the history of education in the United States, it brought him to the New England Calvinists, and that brought him to John Calvin. And, some people get a Bible tract and they read a few verses and they commit themselves to Jesus. He had to read John Calvin's Institutes, which, it's like 500-page tome before he understood the truths of Christianity. So he became a Christian. And he started visiting groups, parents are starting to be concerned. In those days, the homeschool movement was very, very small, and the goal was to start your own school. And have parents start schools. Some of them were Christian-based, some of them were secular, some of them may had a little mixture of both. And it was by the late 70s that Sam got really involved in the homeschool movement. And he started a monthly newsletter. And all of these, by the way, are available on the website, digital format. He started a monthly newsletter. He wrote one of his, I think his first book, well, not his first book, but one I think of his most important books is the NEA, Trojan Horse in American Education. Let me show you a copy of it here. The NEA, National Education Association, a very powerful lobby, very left-wing lobby, completely supporting evolution, supporting a look-say method of reading, etc. And this concerned a lot of parents because a lot of teachers belong to this, and so you're getting in the classrooms, you're getting a good dose of socialism, evolution, Marxism, and now with what you have today, how many genders are there now you're being taught in schools? There's 50 or 60 genders in this grade. I mean, they're actually going out of the way to promote this transgenderism in our classes. So it's come a long way. So we're big advocates here at Camp Constitution of the homeschool movement. We think you haven't, if you're a Christian, you have a moral obligation to get your children out of those government schools.
That's right.
You gave a presentation the last time we were up there, and I wish I had just videotaped that presentation where you basically give a scenario where, little Joey, he's 4 or 5 years old. He believes everything his parents tell him is true. He goes to school because it must be the right place because the teachers are doing what their parents want them to do. And they tell him that there's no God. They tell him that we evolved from monkeys. They tell him that there are 50 genders, that, it's not just male and female. So it causes confusion and it causes resentment and rebellion.
Everybody within the sound of your voice has heard me pour that out, so they all know exactly what you're talking about.
Now, Sam, of course, Sam. When I first met Sam in '89, I was I was a young father, and Sam said, "Do not send your child to a government school." So my oldest daughter went to a private school at my insistence. And my other 4 children all were homeschooled. I think we had my 23-year-old son, Nathaniel, was in a Christian school for 1 year, and my daughter, Georgia, maybe 2 years in a Christian school. And there are some very good Christian schools, and there are some that have a lot of teachers from the secular background. So you have to be careful about Christian schools. And I want to throw out a challenge for all of you who are church attendees, believers in the Lord. Most churches may have a Wednesday service, and they have a Sunday service, maybe 2 Sunday, or maybe Sunday school, and then and the rest of the week they are locked up. But they still have to have the heat on, right? Because in the cold weather, you can't. The pipes will burst. Why not use these churches as schools? You don't have to build a separate school. It doesn't have to be overflowing with people. If you have internet access and you can put desks and chairs, there's a lot of fully accredited online entities. And there's a lot of people that probably belong to that church that may be retired, may even have teaching credentials. Yeah. I mean, it's something, and I know some churches are doing it, but, I travel like you, I travel all over the region. And I usually, in between appointments or visits, I'll stop in and leave information off about the Bloomfield archives. And most of the time I'm stopping into churches that are closed. Unless it's a Wednesday night, there's nobody there. And that's a real shame. I guarantee you, the government community centers are always open. And they're not teaching the same things that we teach at our camp and that you teach. So I really encourage parents to look into that, encourage pastors too, pastors and people who are involved in their church. And so I would say, Sam's most important work, and I pointed, you showed this a little earlier, Phonics for Success. Actually, it was originally called Alpha Phonics, and that's still available. The Alpha Phonics is in a workbook format, but Sam was actually teaching adults. He was teaching adults at a inner city entity here in Boston, and decided to make the same exact material available, but in a smaller format. So Sam created this Alpha Phonics to teach people how to read phonetically. And it's 128 lessons. And I use this for even our oldest daughter. We used it, and all of my children are highly literate. My youngest now is 16. And she does a Liberty Online curriculum right now for homeschooling. And we have testimonies from people all over the world that have used this. In fact, just recently, it was last November, I got an email from this teacher in Johannesburg, South Africa. And she inherited a class of 19 special needs. They used the term learners. And she said in 2 years, there's been no progress with these special needs. They were young, middle school and high school age. She went online and she found the Alpha Phonics, our Sam Blumenfeld archive. She said, I'm going to try to use this. She said in 2 weeks, 17 of the 19 students became good readers. So we actually got a hold of her. We flew her from Johannesburg to Cape Town, South Africa, where back in January, where there was a frontline ministries called Dr. Peter Hammond, Frontline Ministries, and Reverend Stevie Kraft was there with his wife, Edith. So she got a chance to give us really good testimonial about this Alpha Phonics. And you can go right to our website, campconstitution.net, and you can download the Alpha Phonics or the online version with all 128 lessons in audio or video. So, and then there's a workbook too for, you really don't need a workbook, but there's one just for people who feel a little not as confident. And again, you don't have to have a degree, a PhD in education in order to teach people how to read. It may not, in fact, if you get a PhD in a secular school, you probably will not be able to teach people how to read. Now, you'll also see, I'm thinking of booting it up, you'll see some of the books. What the last book he wrote, he co-authored with Alex Newman. It was called Crimes of the Educators. And we have it was an original draft of that available as a free download. I do encourage you to buy the book, and I'm all out of them, but you can get them on Amazon. And I think the WorldNet Daily, I think, is the publisher of that. But we have like a rough draft, which has a lot of the information. And actually, there's a chapter in there that's called The Creation of a Permanent Black Underclass. And he points out that from 1865 to 1965, the Black community has made incredible inroads. There was a growing middle class. There was a high literacy rate. In fact, there was a movie about a Black school down south that had a debating team that was very successful. But because of all the different the Great Society, and because of the inner city, the look-say method, that you now have almost a permanent underclass where these young people, there's no hope. They're not able to read. They're not able to get good jobs in the tech industry, so they resort to crime and what have you. He's not blaming all of it on look-say. There's other factors involved, but he makes a good case for it. And he used the term crimes. He's not talking about the local school teacher, but talking about the folks who are behind the scenes that know exactly what they're doing. And, we look at the results, the dumbing down, we look at the crime in these schools, the pregnancies, and so forth. And it was Pastor Rushdoony, who was a mentor of Sam's, who since passed away. He was a premier Calvinist theologian. He said the results in these government schools are exactly what they want, because if they weren't, they would have changed them a long time ago. And it's really hard to hear. A lot of people don't want to accept that. They think of their alma mater, their high school they went to when, they learned a lot. Well, that's not that way anymore. Interesting. I'm almost 62. I went to a government school from kindergarten until high school, high to force busing, so it was a lot of problems. And there were some pretty good teachers, but they did teach evolution. I remember my pretty 8th grade teacher, And all the guys had a crush on her. And she didn't try to destroy your faith. She didn't say, oh, your parents will bring you to church. That's wrong. She said, but here's a picture of a monkey. And then it shows from a monkey to a man. And hey, she must be right. So that, again, I never thought my parents lied to me, but that really hurt my faith. Thankfully, I got it back. There was in between the 10-year period where, I was struggling with issues, but how many young people go to these schools and lose their faith? In fact, Dr. Duke Pesta, and I recommend Dr. Duke Pesta's Freedom Project Academy, FPA, Freedom Project. Just go online. He's based out of Wisconsin. He is a tenured professor at a state college in Wisconsin, the University of Wisconsin in Oshkosh. And he said that nothing delights his left-wing colleagues is to destroy the faith of a student. And about 80% of the young people going into state colleges who are Christians lose their faith.
Wow.
And what's the Bible say about causing a little one to sin? Better to have a millstone. But they actually rejoice over such things. And
the word says, train up your child, right?
That's right.
Not send your child off to be trained up by the government.
That's right.
Train up your child. It's pretty simple. The first time I read the word from cover to cover, I was just like, this is simple. We make it so difficult. Train up your child. Why are we going to school?
Well, King Solomon said, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom.
Amen.
And if you don't have that, and Sam always talked about a foundation. What is the educational foundation of a Christian school? It's Christianity. It's God.
Right.
It should be. If it's a Baptist school, it's going to have a Baptist perspective. If it's a Pentecostal school, it's going to have a Pentecostal. If it's a parochial school, it should have a Catholic foundation. If it's a secular school, the foundation is secularism, humanism, socialism, abortion, evolution. And a state school, it's interesting too. When you think about a state school, it teaches you to basically support the state. Right. And it would make sense because, like I say, if I'm a Baptist, my school is going to have a Baptist perspective or a Pentecostal perspective if I'm a Pentecostal. If I'm a statist, if I'm an advocate of big government, I'm certainly not going to introduce anything written by Sam Blumenfeld or introduce your book into the school. I'm going to introduce socialism. That's what it's about. Yeah. And so why should we be surprised when our children come home and say that we're fascist because we don't recycle or we're not wearing masks or we must be evil or what have you? That's to be expected. You would expect nothing less. So the archives, what happened was Sam passed away in 2015. He just turned 89. He died in early June. And I visited him on a Thursday. He died on a Monday. In fact, Alex Newman was with me. Alex had co-written a book with him, but they never personally met. They met through, like we're meeting here, they phone calls and Skyping and emails and what have you. And I wanted to get an interview, but Sam had deteriorated so much in just a few days that it would have been an injustice to do that. But as Sam told me that he will promote this, he was, I've known him since he was probably in his early 70s or late 60s. He said, I'm going to do this till I drop. And he did. He was actually selling his book and giving his book away on his deathbed, Wow. And talking about a determined man. And but it was nice I was able to have Alex, being able to meet Sam. We were able to fly Alex up from Florida, and he was able to at least meet him in person. But we pledged to Sam that we will ensure that your work will influence generations yet unborn. He willed me his papers, his writings, his recordings. In fact, he asked me to take possession of them before he actually passed. He had them in a couple of storage units in Littleton, Massachusetts, and stuff in his apartment. And there was like 200 plus boxes and bags, and there was a lot of sifting through. And we actually found his mother's wedding ring, which we gave to his niece. We found some recordings from even reel-to-reel 8-track recordings. We found cassettes. Wow. going back to the 70s. And my good friend Mark Affleck, who was our camp newspaper editor, we have our family camp. We have a little daily newspaper. And Mark loves the PDF and digitized stuff, and he did a phenomenal job. Our webmaster, Eric Conover, was a help as well. And we have about maybe 2 weeks worth of recordings, either audio or video, on the website. And it goes into, he would give lectures on this subject of education and the history of education and why we're in the mess we're in. And so, yeah, you could probably we also have all of his newsletters listed there. We have Sam, we knew a lot of world leaders, knew a lot of political figures, so a lot of their correspondence there. I think there's some correspondence between he and Ronald Reagan on there. One of the things that Sam used to do is he would write letters to mayors of big cities with very bad school systems, and that's almost the case. Every big city has a very bad school system. And he offered his services. He said, give me the worst, least performing school in your city, and I will turn it around in a couple of years. And they would, if they ever wrote back, they would say, well, thank you for your concern, but they would never. So he proved that they do not want to improve education, especially reading in the schools, because if they had, would have at least given him the time of day, and they never did.
Wow.
He also was the founder of America. What was the name of it? The Algerian American, there was Algeria back in the 60s was under communist attack, American Friends of Algeria. And Algeria had a very large Jewish community too. And so he was sympathetic to what was happening there. He was also creator of the American Friends of Gatanga. And Gatanga was a province in what is now Zaire, Belgian Congo. And he met the leader of that beleaguered nation that had been attacked by the UN. The white UN troops went in and did horrible atrocities. And it's very little known, but we have some of their correspondence, and it was fascinating. So I think it's there. Nowhere else is it available, I think, but on our website. So if you're a historian, a researcher, a student, a homeschooler, I think it's a great resource. And to me, it's indispensable.
Wow. So we're getting ready to come up at our half hour mark, and so what I've just started to do actually is this is going to be perfect for this week especially is during at the half hour mark I play a trailer for the documentary Indoctrination.
Oh, wow. Well, actually, Sam is featured in there. In fact, there's a copy of the book Indoctrination.
Yeah.
And Sam was one of the people interviewed in that. I actually know the assistant director, Joaquin Fernandez.
Really, I would love to get in touch with them, because
I can put you in touch with them. Yeah,
I would love to be able to get the documentary, the DVD, and get it out to people, and make it available to people. Oh man, but so we're gonna run that, and so we'll be right back, guys.
I want to see a child in every public school in America who is trained as a witness for Jesus Christ.
When you send that child off to school today, you're sending them into a pagan society.
And the studies are showing that there's virtually no discernible difference between the church and the world. At what point is Southern Baptists going to rise up and say, enough is enough?
Whatever we once were, we are no longer a Christian nation.
We've got to do something different. The schools are failing.
And I would go to 6 or 7 days a week, not just Monday through Friday.
You're not going to be painting, okay? You're going to be writing down whatever comes to your mind when you hear the word gay or when you hear the word lesbian.
So nothing's right or wrong in
no
this
right
either?
That's right.
They are stealing our children. But because they are leaving the body of the child with us, we don't even know it's happening.
If I had my way, government education would be brought to a halt.
Trying to fix public education is like trying to teach a pig how to dance. You get dirty and the pig gets mad.
Turning your children over to total strangers and having those strangers work on your child's mind, it's a mad idea.
Public schools have become a criminal enterprise.
Parents are willing to admit that there are these problems and yet believe that their children will somehow escape. They won't.
And it may have taken a school shooting to wake us up to see the danger, but that's a very small danger compared to all the other things that go on that can destroy our children.
A teacher is in trouble for bringing a religion into his classroom, but should he lose his
When we
job?
go into a public school, we have to leave God at the door. It just came to the point where I couldn't do that anymore.
Jesus said, build your house upon the rock, but the foolish man refused the words of Christ, would not build their education systems on the fear of God, on the words of Christ.
Everything exists to proclaim the glory of God. And the one place where we send our kids 7 hours a day is a place where God's name can't be mentioned. It's not indoctrination, it's insanity.
You know, I've said it before, guys, and I'm going to say it again. You send your child off to receive something, and piece by piece, as they receive it, you tell them that they're wrong, and then you correct them. And then what you're really doing is belittling them by telling them that what they've learned isn't correct. And you sent them there to learn it. So just think about that. And I ask everybody to get indoctrination. Go on Amazon, look up Indoctrination, the documentary, and get it. Because if you can watch that and still put your child on that little yellow school bus to hell, then you're not a parent.
You notice Sam Blumenfeld was in that little spot, and he said that schools have become a criminal enterprise. So
they sure have, because they're, you know, in my day, you had to be recruited or molested into the LGBT movement. For the most part. Nowadays, they don't have to physically molest anybody into it because they're raping their minds right in the classrooms. They're molesting their minds. They're sexualizing them. They're teaching them horrendous lies that everything that they're teaching them screams there's no God.
Mm-hmm.
And I just
when you see the rioting and mayhem being committed by people who despise this country, I can almost guarantee that they went to a government school or a very expensive prep school where they promote the same values that they do in government schools. No exception. You don't see too many people coming out of Christian schools or homeschools trashing and destroying, and they have a hatred. Not only do they have a hatred of this country, in my opinion, the greatest country in the history of mankind, where people come on leaky boats to get here. And that's the most amazing thing. If we're so wicked and evil, why are people of Hispanic and black ethnic backgrounds coming here to be exploited by the evil white people? It doesn't make any sense. Yet they want to tear this country down, and they're threatening that if we don't give in to their demands, there's going to be more riots and more of this and more of that. They're all coming from government schools. And see, one of the things is there's no reason, there's no logic in their thinking. I try to talk to some of these folks. I'm sure you do it all the time. You know, you try to get some common ground, but you look at them, they've got just nothing going on between their ears. They've just been so indoctrinated. Now, there is hope. There is hope for all these folks. Sometimes people do believe they bought a lie. It takes a while. It's a process, though. And we know that over the years, we found lots of people that have come out of this. But just look at what we see today, and it's absolutely the history, the lack of history, the lack of clear thinking, the math skills, all of the tests, all of these various tests they have of going down dramatically, and it's because of this deliberately dumbing down of America, and which is pointed out in books like Indoctrination. In fact, there's a lady up in Maine, Charlotte Isabet, who was a friend of Sam, but they were colleagues and they worked together on many occasions. And she wrote a book entitled "The Deliberately Dumbing Down of America," and you can go to that website, Deliberately Dumbing Down, and you can download that book free of charge. It's a little bit of like 400 or 500 pages, but it's worth it, because she worked for the Department of Education, the U.S. government during the Reagan administration. She was a whistleblower, and that's another issue too. The United States government, under the Constitution, has absolutely no duties to interfere with education. Prior to Jimmy Carter creating a cabinet position, the Department of Education was basically a place where they got information. It was just a place where, that's good. Good. It was just a place to determine stats and facts and figures about the nation's schools. But it became a government level position in the 1970s under Jimmy Carter, and they have no reason to exist. They should be abolished. In fact, I used to joke with Sam that if he ever got appointed to lead the Department of Education, what he would do is get his auction mallet, auction off all of the buildings owned by the government, the Department of Education, and then he would resign and turn in the mallet. Ron Paul, who was a congressman from Texas who ran for president twice, and actually 3 times as a libertarian, he actually tried to get a bill passed back in the 80s. To change the name of the Department of Education to the Department of Public Education, with the acronym being DOPE. And of course, the bill would never pass, but it would have been more appropriate. Because you look at the more money we spend on education, the lower the grades are, the lower the standards are. The test results go down. So is there a correlation here, between government involvement? I have a book. I love going to libraries in my travels, and a lot of these libraries have book sales. And a lot of the books, they have a trashy book, but you can find a gem now and then. And I found this book about 7 or 8 years ago in a library in central Massachusetts. I think I paid a whole $1 for it. And it was a very heavy book. It was published by the U.S. Printing Office, U.S. Government Printing Office. It was entitled "The Formation of the Union under the Constitution." It was to celebrate the 150th anniversary of, I think it was 150th anniversary of the Constitution. And it was a few years late. Now, it was published by Franklin Roosevelt was president, and you had a New Deal Democrat Congress. And in the book, it had a catechism, questions and answers. And one of the questions was, what role does the federal government have in education? And guess what the answer was in this New Deal leftist establishment publication? The answer was none. Very simple. Now, what's happened since then?
Wow.
There's been no amendment passed that granted federal control of education. In fact, there is a law that says that the federal government cannot promote or introduce a curriculum. Common Core was actually funded by Bill Gates, and it was privately held by 2 entities. One of them was the National Governors Association. I can't remember the other one. And so the federal government said, tell you what, we'll give you boatloads of money if you take this Common Core sight unseen. And most states did. Now, thankfully, Common Core has lost some of its some of the enthusiasm, and some states have rejected it. But the schools were bad before Common Core. It's not like, wow, gee, get rid of Common Core, everything's back to it. No, the schools were rotten beforehand. And now with this 1619, teaching us the evils of America and so forth. I appreciate what Donald Trump is trying to promote, this 1776 curriculum.
Right.
And it's one thing to be the office of the president can be a bully pulpit, but they really should not have any involvement. One of the ironies too is that back in the 1980s under Reagan, they passed a law that said that any school secondary school or college that takes federal money must have some type of constitutional program during the week, what they call Constitution Week. The week of the 17th falls in. Now, what's wrong with that law? Well, it's unconstitutional to give federal money to schools. That's what we try to take advantage of that.
What happened to the Constitution Week class?
Yeah, and so now Obama taught the Constitution. So who's teaching the Constitution? You might get somebody who says, "Sure, I'll be happy to teach." You get up there and say, "This is an obsolete document written by dead white Eurocentric males who own slaves," and so forth and so on. Or you have someone like me teaching it. It's a whole different world, right? In fact, I had one of my most, I guess, enjoyable times. I was invited to speak at Keene State College. There was a panel. There was actually a literal witch. She was from the ACLU. She was a practicing witch. There was a left-wing professor. Believe it or not, they found a left-wing professor at Keene State College to be on that forum. They had to do a search far and wide to find a liberal professor. Then they had a conservative professor, but he's more of a neocon, what we'd call. And there was a Jen Coffey, who was a state rep. She was a Liberty Republican, and we had a great time. And on the chair on each chair was a copy of a little pocket copy of the Constitution, which we give out all the time. And we all had little opening comments. So, and I said, all of you have a Constitution that when you sat down, you picked one up. I said, this is your handbook or your owner's manual for a free people. Some of you have no interest in freedom and liberty, so please leave them there, because I'm going to pick them up afterwards and give them to people who do love liberty and do care. Well, when that program ended, there was not one copy of the Constitution left behind. They took them all.
Wow.
Yeah. And this notion that the Constitution is some kind of living and breathing document is just so absurd. The Constitution was written to be obeyed. It was written to give a grant of power, a limited grant of power to the federal level, the Congress, the executive, and the judicial, and everything else left up to the states and to the people. And I think that they talk about the president being the most powerful man in the free world. Show me that in the Constitution where it says that. The president only has a handful of duties and powers. One of them, by the way, is to appoint Supreme Court justices with the advice and consent of the Senate, meaning simple majority. And it doesn't say anything about waiting till the next election, before you appoint one. But the Supreme Court was never supposed to be this powerful. You really shouldn't even know who these justices are, because they have such a little impact on your life. But because of the Supreme Court's become basically the third lawmaking branch. Roe versus Wade, 1972. It was a decision based on a case. All of a sudden, every single state that had laws against abortion was struck down. Well, the Supreme Court doesn't have an army. It doesn't have a police department. So how does it enforce a ruling? Attorney General.
Don't make law.
So the Attorney General can say, look, we don't care what your decision says. We're not going to go into Massachusetts and start arresting elected officials because they're not obeying this decision. Or the Oberfeld decision in Colorado. And who was the lady in Kentucky that refused? In fact, Liberty Counsel was defending us. They took her case. Her name
was Kim, wasn't it?
Kim, yeah, Kim. Anyway, I'm sure one of your listeners has it right on their fingertip. I've been saying it right now. But she refused to disobey Kentucky law by not issuing so-called same-sex marriage certificates. And she was arrested and put into a county jail. And then Obama brought his marshals out to arrest her. If I was the sheriff of that county, I would have arrested the federal marshals and put them in the county jail, and then billed the federal government for their housing. So get out of the county. You cannot violate Kentucky law. Under the 9th and 10th Amendments, you have no jurisdiction here. Goodbye. We have a law that says that marriage is between male and female. Simple.
Well, see, the problem with that is that there's even a lot of our sheriffs don't know the power that they have. That's
correct. And guys like Sheriff Matt, in fact, there's a forum. We're going to be up in Reverend Kraft and I are going to be up in northern Maine and Holton. But a few days later in Lynchburg, there's a forum with county sheriffs there, and I think it's on the 30th. If you put in county sheriff program in Lynchburg, you'll get information on it. So yeah, county sheriffs and it's just like these mask mandates. A mandate is an unconstitutional decision made by a governor. It's not a law, and if it's a law, it's an unjust law. And unjust laws, you have a moral obligation not to obey an unjust law.
Yep. Wow.
You have a Christian duty not to obey an unjust law.
See, the problem is that, and this is what I get when I talk to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
They say, well, it doesn't matter if it's against the law or not, right? It doesn't matter if it's a violation of our rights or not. They're still going to do it, and there's still nothing we can do about it except talk about what we can do about it. So what can they do about it?
Well, there are lots of things you can do about it, not just talk about it. For example, the homeschool movement is flourishing all over the country.
Thank God. Hallelujah.
How rotten the schools are. In fact, there's not much that's come out of this COVID 1984 lockdown. But the fact that schools, some of them reopened, some of them are doing, they don't use the word homeschooling, do they? They use hybrid education. They use all of these terms I've never heard before, distance learning and all that. No, it's really you're homeschooling, right? But if it's a government school teaching you, it's still rotten what's coming through. But now parents are going to see exactly what's being taught. And so the homeschool movement is flourishing. In fact, we're getting more interest in our Sam Bloomfield archive in the last 2 or 3 months than we've had in a long time, because some parents, and I know some parents said, I don't want my child living in going to school with a mask on all day long and plastic shields everywhere. That's not a great environment. So they're looking into homeschooling. And I tell you,
I had a mother that told me, she said she took her son to school. And she went in. She said, "No, you know what? Stay in the car. I'll be right back." She went in and she went up into the office and she said, "Hey, I need to see the classroom." And they said, "Well, you don't need to see the classroom." And she said, "Well, look, I want to see the classroom, or you give me the paperwork to withdraw my child from school." So they took her to the classroom. She said that the desks were far apart, and they had these sheets of plexiglass in between the desks. And she said, "Now you can give me the paperwork to withdraw my child from school." And that was all she had to actually see it. And it's just crazy. It is. It's just crazy.
Well, what's interesting is that 20 or 30 years ago, when the homeschool movement was relatively new, there weren't as many resources. But today, if you attend a homeschool convention in your state, and most states have them. Maine has one, Massachusetts. There's all over the country. Some of these homeschool shows are huge too. I mean, thousands of people show up. It's a question of, my goodness, where do you start? What do I do first? Which program do I use? We started using Abeka, which is Pensacola Christian Academy. Then we started being we took a little bit of this and a little bit of that. We didn't use exclusively one program. And I'm not an unschooler. There's a group called the Unschool Movement. I'm not there, but I'm somewhat. In other words, you don't necessarily have to have a child. Homeschoolers don't have to be a replica of a classroom. And that was a mistake we made. We tried to have little desks, and so the kitchen table is the desk, that laptop or that books, and the whole country is a classroom. Now, you're learning history. You live in New England or you live in the Northeast, you get history everywhere. I would say all over the country, there's history. No matter where you are. But you growing up in New England, man, you've got so much history here, going back from the very 1620s up to recent day. So we did a lot of field trips. So I love books. So you can go see my library, about 10,000 books. You know how much I love books. But I love also visiting places where things happened, museums, battle sites, and so forth. And that's what we've done with my children. They've been to state capitals. They've been to museums. They've been to historic sites. So it's just there's so much rich history. It's one thing to say learn about Paul Revere's ride, but it's next thing is show his house. Here's the Old North Church. This was the steeple. That's where he hung the lanterns. Well, not him. And this is the trail he took. This is where he was stopped by the British. And so forth. And that's something that's really a great way to learn. And you learn that way, I think. And see, everyone learns a little differently. But visual as well as by book learning, it's just amazing, and again, that's something that homeschoolers have that option, where a public school, government school, you might have 1 or 2 field trips a year. Now, I don't know where they bring them now. I'm almost afraid to think where they bring them now,
Oh, please. They take them to museums and zoos, and the museums that they take them to have child pornography all over the walls.
That's it. That's it.
I mean, it's just sickening anymore. Everything that goes on, and I just can't fathom how anybody. And I don't have any children, but so I don't even have that super parental attachment, right? But I still can't even fathom how anybody would send. I wouldn't send my worst enemy's great grandchildren there. I just wouldn't. Yeah. I just wouldn't do it. If I saw bearded men in ball gowns sitting in my library reading homosexual stories that not 10 years ago, 20 years ago were considered deviant and taboo, I would not be treating my child in. Exactly. I wouldn't be handing my child over to them, putting them in the chair. And listen, folks, those bearded men in the ball gowns and those men and women that are working so hard to sexualize your children and your grandchildren, they are not only forgivable, but they're in need of forgiveness. Amen. But that'll be between them and the Lord and the church trying to introduce them. But in the meantime, you need to get your children and your grandchildren out of their reach.
David, let me tell you what we did, Camp Constitution, when I first got wind of these ridiculous drag queen story hours. Fall River, Massachusetts was one of them, and it's a library. Fall River is about an hour or so southeast of Boston. I called the librarian who actually invited this drag queen, this Marxist leftist drag queen, and I said, we have our reading hour, and we want to do a reading of the first Thanksgiving in the story of the Pilgrims. And we brought in Reverend Stevie Kraft and his wife, Edith. Edith did most of the work. And they dressed up in a pilgrim costumes. And they had a nice little turnout there. So a lot of times there's a vacuum. Christians have vacated. So, the devil gets into the vacuum. So I said, look, we may not be able to, we can try to stop some cases have been success getting these drag queens, but let's have an influence in some of these places. So we made that available. I got on the David Knight Show nationwide program, and I said, I challenge people. I said, look, why don't you volunteer to read something wholesome? There's a lot of people out there that have time on their hands. They're retired. You don't have to have it. You could just we have a list of books that we recommend. We can make them available. You can find them next, very cheaply, and just read to them. Read it. You read it. When you read to children, you don't have to dress up in a costume. But we actually we did have a few other. One library was going to book us, and then they decided to cancel us. But even in some of the most leftist areas, you can do this. And we actually videotaped that presentation. If you go to our YouTube channel, I think you put down Camp Constitution's YouTube channel, you say, just put down Reading Hour with Mrs. Kraft. I think you'd find it. And hopefully that will motivate people, what you can do. What can you do? And that's one of the things you can do is to capture the culture. I mean, the Christians have been sitting on the sidelines. This Marxist culture has taken over, whether it be the homosexual agenda, abortion movement, or what have you. And because most of us aren't even in the game, as our friend Coach Dave Doublemeyer would say. But I attended the March for Life in January in D.C. I've never seen so many people in my whole life, and especially young people. So there's a lot of good, decent people left in this country. Absolutely. Man, There's no question about that. Everywhere we go, we're very well received. Our message is well received. Even in right in I'm behind enemy lines in Boston, right? And we have my van that's marked as says Camp Constitution. We get people asking all the time. We have standouts, so we're getting thumbs up all the time, and people eager to learn more about what we're doing. So, and by the way, I do want to mention too that we have a week-long. I know we have a few minutes left. We have a week-long family camp, and this year's camp we had our biggest turnout we ever had. We actually we're having our first annual ladies retreat at the same location. It's going to be October 2nd to the 4th. And at this camp, they're going to be doing some marksmanship. They're going to be doing some there'll be some Bible studies. Barbara from Harlem will be the guest speaker. She's a very dynamic Christian lady, a black lady. And it's at the Singing Hills Christian Camp and Retreat Center. So if you go to our website, you can inquire about that. It's just ladies, by the way, and it's $200 for the whole event.
Which means you have to have been female from birth, and the medical community must have assigned you female at birth in order to attend.
That's correct. But next year's camp, July 18th to the 23rd. A week-long family camp. Well, it's Sunday to Friday morning, but this year's camp was, I guess, our largest turnout ever. We had Alex Newman, who was a colleague of Sam Blumenfeld's. We had Reverend Stevie Kraft. We had Catherine White, who's a constitutional scholar. Dr. Felicia Nace from New Jersey. Debbie Bacigalupi, who was an expert on Agenda 21, and one of the top scientists. He's an astrophysicist. He's one of the top climate realists, not just in the area, but in the world, Dr. Willie Soon. We were going to have Lord Christopher Monckton, but he couldn't get in the country because of the COVID. But Lord Christopher was a British lord that's been to our camp the last, not this year, but 2 years prior, and we hopefully be there next year. So you can get the information right from our website, campconstitution.net. You can reach me directly if you like. And we have a speakers bureau. You want to bring a speaker out. Reverend Stevie Kraft has done this incredible program called Color, Communism, and Common Sense. He just got back from a gig down in Florida. He and his wife, they were invited down after a pastor happened to see the video he did at camp on the subject. And it's a book that we put back in print, written by a former black communist by the name of Manning Johnson. And people are seeing what's going on today, and they're looking at this book written in 1958 by a man who's been dead over about 60 years. Folks, what's happening today is nothing new. As King Solomon said, nothing new under the sun. What's happening today has been planned a long time ago. So, I guess our YouTube channel has a lot of great video. We have a lot of the Sam Blumenfeld presentations that we converted from audio to YouTube as well, and you can find them on our page, on our channel.
Amen. So, hey guys, look, go over to campconstitution.net first, and go over to Camp Constitution on YouTube. Check out their YouTube channel. Subscribe.
You can, if you go to our website, you can find a link to our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, then the Sam Blumenfeld archives. Also, we have our downloads. We have some great resources in our downloads, and I think we did post the Color, Communism, Common Sense in a PDF format as well. So,
yeah, and I've shared that that lesson one that was done at the camp quite a few times. It's just very powerful, and I would love to have Rev come on and do just that presentation. I know that the show was really, I mean, he had I forget her name. She's a retired Army colonel. She was at the house when he did the show last week.
Centurion.
Yeah.
Ingrid Centurion. Yeah.
She's running for office. So so it was pretty powerful, and I was blessed because I was like, okay, she was like a bonus, right? But I would love to have him come on and do the actual presentation. Because
we should have you down at the Learning Center in Lexington at some point, and we could do a remote there, do a live show there.
Yeah, that would be awesome. That would be awesome, because then we could, really just have whoever, right, a whole bunch of people.
Yeah.
So All right, guys. CampConstitution.net, Hal Shirtleth. Go check them out. Listen, click on the Sam Blumenfeld. Hold on, let me get there. Feld. Click on Sam Blumenfeld. Hold on. See right here.
Here you go. Yeah.
And I'm not going to click it now because it'll open up in a new window, but you got to click on it and register. Register with the website.
Email. Yeah, we just say an email address and you can give us all your contact information, but the minimum was a email and a username.
Yeah, register, because then you can go on to the Sam Blumenfeld archives and you can listen. There's so much information, right? There's no way anybody can say that they're not. They just can't get it. Can't do that, can't get it. I just don't know how to teach. I just don't know how to tutor. I don't know how to do that. And my brother Chance is on it, Ingrid Centurion, and there's her Facebook, so you can look her up too and learn about her. Chance is on it. Camp Constitution. He put the link in the chat, so if you're watching, the links are in the chat. So and they're in the chat on both YouTube channels. So yeah. Well, Hal, I gotta say thank you, and
thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
I haven't been full of questions tonight. I'm beat. I am exhausted. I can't wait to get off of here so I can climb into that bed over there and pass out.
Well, have a good night's sleep, and we'll catch you down the road.
Amen. And so thank you, Hal. Hey, guys, campconstitution.net. Go check them out. And just remember, Sam Blumenfeld, indoctrination, get your kids out of the public government school system. Amen.
Amen.
All right. I love you guys. Lord willing, I will see y'all next week. Some of y'all, I'll see you in the morning. Peace.